Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, May 7, 2025. Federal Reserve holds interest rates steady. Chair Jerome Powell says there is still too much uncertainty in how Trump administration policies, especially tariffs, will affect the economy, inflation, and job growth. Treasury Secretary Scott Besson testifies before a House committee about his meeting this weekend with Chinese officials on tariffs and trade. More Trump administration officials go before House Appropriations Subcommittees, talking about their agency's budgets, including Energy Secretary Chris Wright, FEMA Acting Administrator Cameron Hamilton, and FBI Director Kash Patel. Attorney General Pam Bondi announces the arrest of over 200 alleged child sex predators. Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik questions the President of Haverford College at a hearing on college antisemitism. Vice President JD Vance says that Russia is asking for too much in peace negotiations with Ukraine. Former President Joe Biden talks about the war in Ukraine in a BBC radio interview, his first interview since leaving office. And black smoke comes out of the chimney on the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican, meaning no pope elected on the first ballot of the conclave. USA Today reports the Federal Reserve is still firmly in wait-and-see mode. The Fed left its key interest rate unchanged again Wednesday and gave no hint it plans to lower it soon, as President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs raise the risks of both another inflation spike and recession. But officials signaled they're growing increasingly concerned about both hazards. The decision leaves the Fed's benchmark short-term rate at a range of 4.25% to 4.5% for a third straight meeting. Central Bank lowered the rate by a percentage point late last year as a pandemic-related price surge eased, but has paused since as it gauges the impact of Trump's hefty duties. That was from the USA Today article. The Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell announced the decision at the start of his news conference in Washington.
Despite heightened uncertainty, the economy is still in a solid position. The unemployment rate remains low, and the labor market is at or near maximum employment. Inflation has come down a great deal, but has been running somewhat above our 2% longer-run objective. In support of our goals, today the Federal Open Market Committee decided to leave our policy interest rate unchanged. The risks of higher unemployment and higher inflation appear to have risen, and we believe that the current stance of monetary policy leaves us well positioned to respond in a timely way to potential economic developments.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell opening up his news conference in Washington. Ben Castleman, chief economics correspondent for the New York Times, writing about the Fed's written statement on its decision not to change interest rates. The statement doesn't use the word, and I doubt Powell will either, but the Fed is essentially highlighting the possibility of stagflation, in which growth is weak but inflation is high. Policymakers aren't necessarily predicting that outcome. It's possible we could get higher unemployment or faster inflation, but not both. But the risks have risen. That was from Ben Castleman of the New York Times. Fed Chair Powell asked at his news conference when conditions would be right to adjust inflation rates.
Steve Leisman, CNBC. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for taking my question. A lot has happened since the last meeting. There's been tariffs put on, tariffs taken off, and meanwhile there's a bill advancing in Congress. And I just wonder if I could press you on the last part of your statement. Are you any closer now to deciding which side of the mandate is going to need urgent care first?
Well, so as we noted in our statement, post-meeting statement, we've judged that the risks to higher employment and higher inflation have both risen. And this, by the way, of course, is compared to March. So that's what we can say. I don't think we can say, which way this will shake out. I think there's a great deal of uncertainty about, for example, where tariff policies are going to settle out. And also, when they do settle out, what will be the implications for the economy, for growth, and for employment? I think it's too early to know that. So, ultimately, we think our policy rate is in a good place to stay as we await further clarity on tariffs and ultimately their implications for the economy.
Hearing you describe what you're looking for in terms of being able to make a decision, it sounded like that's a long-term process before you sound like you're going to be comfortable, or the committee would be comfortable to act on what the data is telling you.
I don't think we know. I think if you look where we are today, we have an economy that, if you look through, the sort of distortions in Q1 GDP, you've still got an economy that looks like it's growing at a solid pace. The labor market appears to be solid. Inflation is running just a bit above 2%. So it's an economy that's been resilient and is in good shape. And our policy is sort of modestly or moderately restrictive. It's 100 basis points less restrictive than it was last fall. And so we think that leaves us in a good place to wait and see. We don't think we need to be in a hurry. We think we can be patient. We're going to be watching the data. The data may move quickly or slowly, but we do think we're in a good position where we are to let things evolve and become clearer in terms of what should be the monetary policy response.
Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell at today's news conference. President Donald Trump has been calling for the Fed to lower interest rates. He said last week, "You are not supposed to criticize the Fed. You are supposed to let him do his own thing. But I know much more than he does about interest rates, believe me." Congressman Brendan Boyle, Democrat of Pennsylvania, the Budget Committee ranking member, posting on X, "Today's Fed decision was no surprise. It's the predictable result of President Trump's chaos, his tariffs, his threats, and his refusal to take responsibility." On Wall Street, the Dow up today, 284, NASDAQ up 48, and S&P up 24. Story from the New York Times. By agreeing to meet with the Trump administration to discuss trade, China is seeking to cast itself as the responsible one in a bruising superpower competition that has roiled the global financial system and set off fears of a recession. For weeks, China had publicly said that it would not engage in trade talks with the United States under duress, refusing to kneel down and compromise with a bully. It insisted that Washington should first drop its eye-watering tariffs on China as a condition for negotiations. On Wednesday, Beijing indicated it would come to the table after all, saying its top trade official would meet with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent in Switzerland this week. Even so, it maintained a tough stance, warning Washington against using the talks as a smokescreen to continue coercion and extortion. Chinese government said it had come to the decision based on a full consideration of global expectations, China's interests, and the calls of American industry and consumers, suggesting that it was doing so largely for the greater good. That was from the New York Times. Treasury Secretary Scott Besson testified today before House Appropriations Subcommittee. Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, Democrat of New York, asked about tariffs and China.
In congressional testimony yesterday, you said the U.S. has not started negotiating with China on tariff reductions. Does that continue to be your position, yes or no?
As you may have read,
yes or no, sir?
As you may have read in the press, I will be going to Switzerland, and the negotiations will begin on Saturday.
Okay, so the president told you that that will be your answer today. So can you tell who from the Trump administration is engaged in those discussions?
Which discussions?
With China.
Trade discussions?
Pardon?
I'm sorry.
Trade discussions, yes, sir.
Well, the trade negotiations will be led by myself and Ambassador Jameson Greer,
And
USTR.
And what about Pete Navarro?
Sorry?
Peter Navarro.
He will not be joining us in Geneva.
Thank God for that. Are those negotiations considered advanced?
Pardon?
Are those negotiations considered advanced?
As I said, on Saturday we will begin, which I believe is the opposite of advance.
Secretary Besson, as Treasury Secretary and a senior member of President Trump's economic team, has President Trump given you the authority to finalize any trade agreement with China or any other trading partner?
As President Trump has stated, he will have the final decision on any trade agreement.
So you're telling me all of these increased prices, the stock market losses, the production delays are all based on the whims of Donald Trump, that you could strike the best deal with Canada, Mexico, or even China that is completely in our favor, giving us everything the administration
Gentlewoman's time has expired.
And if President Trump decides at any certain moment, for whatever reason, not to take the deal, that will be it. I yield back.
Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, Democrat from New York, questioning the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent at today's House Appropriations Subcommittee hearing. President Donald Trump spoke about the upcoming trade talks with China as he met with reporters in the White House Oval Office. The questions on this topic were scattered throughout the news conference. Here are three placed back to back to back.
Just to follow up, sir, on the talks in Switzerland, what do you expect? What do you hope to come out of it?
We'll see. I mean, look, it's we were losing $1 trillion a year. Now we're not losing anything. You know, that's the way I look at it. We were losing with China on trade $1 trillion a year, more actually, 1.1. But let's say $1 trillion. You know what we're losing now? Nothing. That's not bad.
China says in order to have substantive negotiations, you have to bring down your 145% tariffs. Are you open to pulling back your tariffs in order to get China to the negotiating table?
No.
China said the U.S. initiated the trade talks this weekend and that its position hasn't changed. Are you still confident you can reach a deal with China?
They said we initiated? Well, I think they ought to go back and study their files. Okay? I do think that.
President Donald Trump with reporters in the White House Oval Office, and there's a story at CNBC. The upcoming meeting in Switzerland between U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and his Chinese counterpart was requested by the Trump administration. Chinese officials said Wednesday China will be entering the talks firmly opposed to U.S. tariff hikes and willing to participate only in a dialogue based on equality, respect, and mutual benefit, a foreign ministry spokesman wrote on X. And the Post continues to pressure or coerce China in whatever way simply does not work. We will resolutely safeguard our legitimate interests and uphold international fairness and justice, reporting from CNBC. This is Washington Today. Another story about tariffs from Reuters. Ford Motor is hiking prices on 3 of its Mexico-produced models effective May 2nd. Becoming one of the first major automakers to adjust sticker prices following U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs. Prices on the Mustang Mach-E electric SUV, Maverick pickup, and Bronco Sport will increase by as much as $2,000 on some models, according to a notice sent to dealers reviewed by Reuters. Energy Secretary Chris Wright begins an article at The Well News, told a congressional appropriations panel on Wednesday that his department's $45.1 billion budget request for fiscal year 2026 will bring to a halt an investment in the Green New Scam while prioritizing the rapid deployment and export of small modular nuclear reactors and liquid natural gas. He said in his opening statement before the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Energy and Water Development, our budget is a fiscally responsible budget that will ensure taxpayer resources are allocated appropriately and cost-effectively. That was from The Well News. Congressman Michael Cloud, Republican of Texas, asked Secretary Wright about energy promotion.
As we're competing with China, one of the biggest concerns that I have is just the speed it takes to get things done in our country. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that, what you could do in your agency to help with permitting processes and those kind of things, what you need help from us in Congress, any advice you would have on what we need to do to work with the NRC or other regulatory agencies to speed up the permitting process. You know, we used to be known in America as people who can get things done and do it pretty effectively, quickly, and now that seems to not be the case. We need to return that. So how do we go about that?
Boy, that's the big question. It is a very big question. It's certainly one of the reasons I'm here. I just came from abroad. I was in Central Europe last week, and I traveled in the Middle East a week or two before that. And everyone wants to invest in America, right? Because you got rule of law and you can do business in America. And there is a growing concern that we can't get permits. We're ready to bring a lot of money, and obviously, everybody wants us to build a data center or a power plant or whatever it is their investment's going to, but it's taken us forever to get a permit. This is making our society more stagnant. It's pushing manufacturing and things overseas. It's chilling investment in our country, which means less jobs are created in our country, less pressure to push wages up that we all want to see. So it is absolutely critical. I can tell you a few things we did at the Department of Energy. For example, in the national labs, think of OSHA, right? We have a very robust, maybe overly robust, health regulatory agency that all businesses comply with, including my former businesses when I was in a different life. At the Department of Energy, you have to comply with all that, and then another layer. another layer that's mostly duplicative and slightly different in some areas. You can't even get most of the people to bid on building something because they're not going to go through that extra hoop. It cost the Department of Energy to build like a laboratory building where scientists are working on computers 60% more than it would cost a business across the street to build the same thing. So the government, of course, is just, and so I convened all the national lab directors within 2 weeks of my arrival in the doors to tell us, how can I help you? How can we make things more efficiently? Now, that's just in the labs. But they gave me a bunch of lists, and we are rapidly implementing them so we can build stuff quicker and faster and remove some of this red tape. But for commercial businesses, they have a ton as well. The National Energy Dominance Council was really created to get all of the agencies, EPA, Interior, Energy, Commerce, Treasury together of what, and what we basically do is we listen to businesses everywhere. Why can't you invest in that? Or what's slowing you down? And we are trying to knock things over that we can that are regulatory. But I think some kind of congressional permitting reform is necessary as well. Part of our team is working with people in Congress. What's the bipartisan way to get bills that just put timelines on certain things? NEPA's to protect our environment. Everybody wants clean air and clean water, but if a NEPA thing makes something last 6 or 7 years to get approved, most things just simply won't get built. It just means nothing happens. Yeah. So thank you for expressing that sentiment. I think it's a huge problem in our country. How can we advance if we can't build anything?
Energy Secretary Chris Wright testifying before an Appropriations Subcommittee questioned by Congressman Michael Cloud, Republican of Texas. Cameron Hamilton, the acting director of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, testified today before another House Appropriations Subcommittee about President Trump's plans to shift to the states more responsibility for responding to emergencies. Hamilton took over in January from former FEMA Director Deanne Criswell. Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, Democrat of Illinois, is the ranking member on the subcommittee.
Mr. Hamilton, I'd like to discuss the Achieving Efficiency Through State and Local Preparedness Executive Order. This executive order may sound efficient in theory, but in practice it reads as though the federal government is turning its back on the communities that need it the most. I'm concerned that the goal of this executive order isn't to decentralize disaster response, but to offload federal responsibility. It effectively tells small towns, rural communities, tribal nations, and underfunded municipalities, you're on your own. I represent a rural and suburban area in northern Illinois, and many of these communities lack emergency management infrastructure, sufficient mitigation planning, and access to federal support. There is no way that the small towns that I represent are equipped to handle leading coordination and response with multiple federal agencies in the wake of a major disaster. Shifting the burden to them is not only irresponsible and wasteful, it's dangerous. Can you update this committee on the status of the executive order's implementation and what specific actions has FEMA taken or is FEMA preparing to take under this new directive?
Yes, ma'am. Sorry, I was trying to hit the mute button. So we stand by the President in his efforts to ensure that we maintain higher efficiency when it comes to this particular executive order. We are at a bit of an imbalance. We want to partner with states. That partnership requires state investment. And so what we're looking at is policies and initiatives that encourage greater state participation. This will not be a radical transition in an instant. This has to occur in a phased approach where we mentor states and locals on building capacity and capability. An example of that is Florida and Texas, really two shining beacons of success with emergency management. It took many years to build and implement some of those resources and infrastructure there, and they've done some unbelievable work. In fact, they're some of the only states that have actual individual assistance programs, whereas many other states do not. So what we are looking at specifically is finding ways to more closely target risk reduction outcomes for states with future grants, and to ensure that states are able and empowered to assume a greater role, mostly in what we consider long-term exorbitant recovery costs.
So then how is that consistent with the intent of the Stafford Act, which is built around the principle of federal support when state and local capabilities are exceeded?
You're right, and the Stafford Act there is very clear on the role in which the federal government plays a resource in assisting those who are overwhelmed. The problem is we've created financial incentives for the continuation of that and even expanded levels. We've kind of lowered disaster thresholds. We've used other criteria that, to be honest, are a little bit too soft, for my opinion, that have incentivized financially a lack of carrying insurance policies, as well as lower disaster thresholds, which are probably not the best use of my staff. This isn't to say that states aren't in need. We know they are. but we have to raise the threshold so that FEMA can truly prioritize efforts where the state is in fact overwhelmed. We have a variety of disaster declarations that we've seen that have come to FEMA where the state has also been required to state publicly they have enough insurance to take out a plan and actually execute payments for the costs that they've incurred. This is an imbalance where states have used FEMA as a financial backstop, where we believe it's more applicable and appropriate for FEMA to be a utilized resource in the event the state is actually overwhelmed with resources.
Okay, thank you.
Testimony from the FEMA acting director, Cameron Hamilton. Questions from Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, Democrat of Illinois, ranking member on the House Appropriations Subcommittee holding today's hearing. There's an article from Politico. The Trump administration is on track to run out of cash for disaster relief this summer. And the House's top appropriator has been asking for an emergency request from the White House. FEMA estimates that it will be down to about $5 billion in the disaster relief fund in June, just in time for the start of Atlantic hurricane season, before running out of cash by July or August. By the time the new fiscal year dawns in October, the Trump administration predicts it will have $8 billion in disaster costs it cannot pay, unless Congress clears an emergency aid package in the meantime. But lawmakers need President Donald Trump to send a formal request to make that happen. That was from Politico. This is Washington Today. FBI Director Kash Patel testified before another House Appropriations Subcommittee about the FBI's budget request. He also talked about its mission and what he sees as the accomplishments of the FBI in the first 3 months of the new administration. Director said in his opening statement, the FBI takes its responsibility of fiscal stewardship seriously and is looking at all available options to optimize existing resources and deliver more efficiently. Over the past 2 months, we have commenced the process to reallocate hundreds of positions from the National Capital Region out to field offices across the country to enhance investigative capacity and provide better support to federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial partners. During the hearing, Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, Democrat from Connecticut, the full committee ranking member, asked Director Patel about the administration's funding request for fiscal year 2026.
Director Patel, you have previously stated that your number one priority for the FBI is to end violent crime in the United States. The budget request slashes the FBI budget by more than $500 million below the current level. It quite literally would defund law enforcement, including, it would appear, cutting a number of FBI intelligence analysts who work on critical national security issues. How is it possible to cut more than $500 million, or more than 5% below a hard freeze in the FBI's operating budget, without impacting the law enforcement and national security-related functions of the FBI? Please specify exactly which positions would be cut.
Ma'am, at this time, we have not looked at who to cut. We are focusing our energies on how not to have them cut, by coming in here and highlighting to you that we can't do the mission on those 2011 budget levels. And so what we're focusing on is right now is working with our partners in OMB, the appropriators, to say that we cannot cover down on the mission at the levels that we would have to go to, which would be the 2011 levels, should all the budget cuts you just outlined be implemented.
So, but are you talking about coming up here with a budget request that restores the funding that has been cut, that it's a defunding law enforcement? You're talking about $500 million below the current level. How would you restructure the budget to get to where you need in order to be able to make sure that we are not defunding law enforcement and that we are not cutting the analysts that you need in order to be able to do your job and to be dealing with national security issues? I don't understand. You've got a budget request, $500 million less, and you're cutting people. You don't know who you're going to cut. You don't want. Tell us which it is. Are you going to restore that $500 million? You're going to request restoring that $500 million?
Well, as I said, I'm not the budget expert, but the budget request that we put in, the FBI, was $11.2 billion, I believe. And we are working through the appropriations process and the OMB process and the skinny budget that we've received to work with y'all to help us get to a number. And I believe if we got back the number you stated, we would not have to cut more FBI.
So with a $500 million cut, more than 5% below the hard freeze of the FBI's operating budget, you believe that then this would not impact enforcement or national security related functions. Then what are the positions? I'm going to ask the question again. What positions are you looking to cut? What is the cut for this $500 million? Now, apparently that $500 million, you're not in the budget department, but this is your budget.
Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro, Democrat from Connecticut, ranking member on the Appropriations Committee at today's subcommittee hearing on the FBI budget with the director, Kash Patel. You can find the video of the full hearing at our website, cspan.org. From the National, the FBI and Justice Department announced on Wednesday the arrest of 205 alleged child sex predators in the last week in Operation Restore Justice. Attorney General Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel praised the, quote, historic, unprecedented nationwide operation during a news conference and thanked the 55 FBI field officers who helped rescue 115 victims. Here's part of that news conference held at the Justice Department in Washington with Attorney General Pam Bondi.
Today, we are proud to announce the results of the FBI's Operation Restore Justice initiative. This historic, unprecedented nationwide operation led to the arrest of 205 child sex predators. Unbelievable. In just 5 days. This was an incredible operation done in conjunction with the FBI and our prosecutors. Children and their families now have a chance to heal. These are online predators. Think about this. 115 victims, children. In 5 days, we were able to help. This kind of work takes a toll on the FBI agents and the prosecutors who are doing this every single day. They are working tirelessly online, dealing with the dregs of our society, the worst of the worst, the people that hide behind a computer and target our young children every single day. Our law enforcement, our prosecutors sit there and deal with this every day to get these monsters off the street. Director Patel and I, almost daily in our meetings, talk about these cases and what it does to our officers and our prosecutors, but also how many lives are being saved and how many children are being helped by this. Director Patel is going to get into the specific cases with you in a minute, but what I will tell you is these depraved human beings, if convicted, will face the maximum penalty in prison, some life.
Attorney General Pam Bondi standing beside FBI Director Kash Patel at today's Justice Department news conference. The Attorney General also urged parents to talk to their children about the dangers of child predators online. Patel noted the arrests included several people in places of public trust, including teachers, law enforcement personnel, and other professionals that we look to safeguard our children. Story from The Hill. President Trump on Wednesday deferred to senators to vote the way they feel they must when questioned about Senator Thom Tillis, Republican of North Carolina, torpedoing the nomination of Ed Martin, who is Trump's choice to serve as U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia. That was reporting from The Hill. Here's the president in the Oval Office.
Senator Tillis has come out against Ed Martin as U.S. Attorney. Do you have any response to that?
Well, it's disappointing because I know Eddie's very talented. Crime is down in Washington, D.C. Street crime, violent crime by 25%. And people have seen, they've noticed a big difference. So I didn't know that. But if anybody voted against him, I feel very badly about it, only in the sense that in this short period of time that he's been there, crime is down 25% in Washington, D.C. But that's really up to the senators. If they feel that way, they have to vote the way they vote. They have to follow their heart, and they have to follow their mind.
President Donald Trump taking reporters' questions in the White House Oval Office today. More from the article at The Hill. Ed Martin is currently serving as the interim U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia and has come under strong criticism for helping organize the Stop the Steal movement after the 2020 election and for serving as defense counsel to people charged with January 6 related crimes. Tillis, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee who faces a tough re-election race in 2026, cited Martin's advocacy for people convicted of January 6 related crimes when he announced he couldn't support the nomination. That was from the article at The Hill. Washington Today continues in a moment.
The weekly podcast is a unique offering from C-SPAN. We record it right here in the C-SPAN radio studios in beautiful downtown Capitol Hill. In a town where extremes get so much attention, this isn't more extreme opinion, it's extreme history. Connecting the old with the new. Hear what's happening right now against the backdrop of the history you know. So listen, follow, and enjoy the C-SPAN radio podcast, The Weekly. And have friends and family who love political history and even love C-SPAN's coverage of politics? Tell them about it too. Find C-SPAN's The Weekly wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. A few more headlines from Politico. President Donald Trump plans to withdraw his nominee to be Surgeon General just one day before Fox News contributor Jeanette Nesheiwat was scheduled to appear before the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, according to three people familiar with the decision, granted anonymity to discuss the matter. The decision to pull Nesheiwat comes after reports that she obfuscated facts about her medical education. The Trump administration is on the verge of blatantly defying a court order by deporting immigrants from Asia to the war-torn African nation of Libya. Attorneys for the immigrants said Wednesday, citing alarming reports in the media and accounts from some of their clients. The lawyers filed an emergency motion seeking to block a military flight that appears to be on the verge of taking off from the U.S. And the Trump administration plans to publish news from One America News Network, a pro-Trump far-right outlet known for peddling conspiracy theories, on the Voice of America and other U.S.-run media. Some of the headlines from Politico. Inside Higher Education reports that almost a year after the last hearing on campus anti-Semitism, Congress is again taking aim at colleges they say have become hotbeds of anti-Jewish harassment and discrimination. This time, lawmakers are targeting California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo, DePaul University, and Haverford College. Presidents from the institutions testifying at a congressional hearing today. It's the House Education and Workforce Committee that held the hearing titled Beyond the Ivy League, Stopping the Spread of Anti-Semitism on American Campuses. Here's Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, Republican from New York, questioning Wendy Raymond, Haverford College president.
There was a student group on Haverford's campus who called for the complete dismantling of the apartheid settler colonial state of Israel by all means necessary. What does by all means necessary mean to you?
Invoking that kind of terminology is repugnant because of what it can mean, and I will not.
So does that depend on the context?
I will not defend that statement.
So what disciplinary action was taken against that group or those individuals who made that call? Any disciplinary action? Was there any disciplinary action taken against that group or those individuals?
Those kinds of statements are.
I'm not asking you if they're repugnant. I'm asking about the disciplinary action. You were the one university president who failed to lay out if any disciplinary action has been taken, if any suspensions or expulsions. So I am asking you, was there any disciplinary action taken?
Disciplinary action can include expulsion and.
I'm not asking what it can include. I'm asking, was it taken?
I will not be talking about individual cases here, and I'm saying that that is.
So have there been any disciplinary actions taken by Haverford related to anti-Semitism? Any?
Disciplinary actions are absolutely in our work.
Have they been taken?
Against anti-Semitism.
Have they been taken by Haverford?
Yes, there have been some.
I want to ask you another example. There was a professor of Mathematics and Statistics, who posted after the October 7th Hamas terrorist attacks, quote, "We should never have to apologize for celebrating these scenes of an imprisoned people breaking free from their chains. This was a historic moment to be recorded in their history books." Jewish students have reported that you said this post could be, quote, "perceived in many ways." Does this post simply depend on the context, President Rabin? And were there any disciplinary actions taken against this professor?
Such posts have been incredibly harmful to our entire community, and I disavow them and that outcome for us.
Was there an investigation of the professor?
Investigations happen in all such cases.
So yes, in this case.
Investigations happen in all such cases, as I have said. And we follow.
This is a simple question. The other presidents are answering this straightforward as to disciplinary action. Again, these university presidents who are former presidents fail to answer these direct questions. In this case, was there disciplinary action taken or an investigation of this professor?
Respectfully, Representative, I will not be talking about individual cases.
Respectfully, President of Haverford, many people have sat in this position who are no longer in the positions as president of universities for their failure to answer straightforward questions.
Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, Republican from New York, questioning Wendy Raymond, Haverford College president, at today's Education and Workforce Committee hearing on anti-Semitism on college campuses with the presidents of several colleges. There's a story from Reuters. The United States and Israel have discussed the possibility of Washington leading a temporary post-war administration of Gaza, according to 5 people familiar with the matter. The high-level consultations have centered around a transitional government headed by a U.S. official that would oversee Gaza until it had been demilitarized and stabilized, and a viable Palestinian administration had emerged, the sources said, reporting from Reuters. Vice President JD Vance begins a Fox News article, said that the concessions that Russia is seeking from Ukraine to end the conflict between the two are too stringent, but he believes there is a viable path forward for peace and wants both to find common ground. Vance appeared for discussion with Ambassador Wolfgang Eisinger, president of the Foundation Council of the Munich Security Conference and the former German ambassador to the U.S. Russia's demands include Ukraine never joining NATO and preventing foreign peacekeeper troops from deploying to Ukraine following the conflict. Additionally, Russia is seeking to adjust some of the borders that previously were Ukraine's. Additionally, Ukraine is on board with a 30-day ceasefire, while Russia refuses to participate. That was from Fox News. Vice President Vance at the Munich leaders meeting in Washington, D.C.
I'm not yet that pessimistic on this. I wouldn't say that the Russians are uninterested in bringing this thing to a resolution. What I would say is right now, the Russians are asking for a certain set of requirements, a certain set of concessions in order to end the conflict. We think they're asking for too much, okay? And then obviously, the Ukrainians matter a lot. They're the other side. They're the other party, at least to the direct conflict. And we have to ask, what is the Ukrainian, what do they need in order to bring this conflict to a successful completion? And we're going to continue to have that conversation. Now, what the president has said is that he will walk away if he thinks he's not making progress. And I think that, about once every 4 or 5 weeks, you will hear some American official or sometimes multiple American officials say, this is a week where we need to make another step. And in particular, the step that we would like to make right now is we would like both the Russians and the Ukrainians to actually agree on some basic guidelines for sitting down and talking to one another. Obviously, the United States is happy to participate in those conversations, but it's very important for the Russians and the Ukrainians to start talking to one another. We think that is the next big step that we would like to take. And why does that matter? The reason it matters is because, again, I mentioned the Russians, but also the Ukrainians have also been they've put a piece of paper in our hands that says this is what we would need in order to bring this conflict to a successful resolution from our perspective. And there's a big gulf, predictably, between where the Russians and the Ukrainians are, and we think the next step in the negotiation is to try to close that gulf. We think it's probably impossible for us to mediate this entirely without at least some direct negotiation between the two, and so that's what we focused on. But I'm not yet a pessimist on this. I mean, obviously, the Russians and the Ukrainians are not there yet because the fighting is still going on, The Ukrainians have said they would agree to a ceasefire, a 30-day ceasefire. We appreciate that. What the Russians have said, again, you don't have to disagree with it, but it's important to understand where the other side is coming from. What the Russians have said is a 30-day ceasefire is not in our strategic interest. So we've tried to move beyond the obsession with the 30-day ceasefire and more on the what would the long-term settlement look like. And we've tried to consistently advance the ball. One final point I'd make about this, I think it's probably wouldn't surprise anybody in the room, but there are a lot of people watching who are not in the room, is a frustration that we've had, frankly, with both sides, is that they hate each other so much that if you have an hour conversation with either side, the first 30 minutes are just them complaining about some historical grievance from 4 years ago or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Look, I understand it. I understand that people don't fight wars against each other without a lot of grievance and a lot of problem, but we're trying to, as much as we can, play a constructive role in advancing the peace conversation forward. And what I'll say, just to echo something that President Trump has said many times, but I think it bears repeating, is our strong view is that the continuation of this conflict is bad for us, it's bad for Europe, it's bad for Russia, and it's bad for Ukraine. We think that if cool heads prevail here, we can bring this thing to a durable peace that will be economically beneficial for both the Ukrainians and the Russians, and most importantly, will stop the end of the destruction of human lives. I think people underappreciate this about our president here in the United States is he has a genuine humanitarian impulse about this. He hates innocent people losing their lives. He hates even soldiers losing their lives in unnecessary conflicts. He just wants the killing to stop, and that will continue to be America's policy. But obviously, as all of you have seen, we'll navigate that policy and react as the parties bring their grievances to us.
Vice President JD Vance at the Munich Security Conference event in Washington, D.C. today. He joked that he was not sure he would be invited back to speak to the conference after his February speech in Germany, in which he criticized European governments for ignoring the will of their people and ignoring religious freedom and not stopping illegal immigration. Today, the vice president said, "It's not Europe bad and America good. I think both Europe and the United States, we've gotten a little bit off track, and I'd encourage us all to get back on track together." Former President Joe Biden spoke about the war between Russia and Ukraine and the policies of the Trump administration on BBC Radio, his first interview since leaving office.
President Trump is now saying, look, if you want peace, Ukraine is going to have to give up some territory. Some people think that is common sense to say that. Do you think it's not common sense? It's perhaps modern-day appeasement?
It is modern-day appeasement. Look, listen to what Putin said when he talked about going from Kyiv into Ukraine and why. He can't stand the fact that the Russian dictatorship that he runs, that the Soviet Union has collapsed. And anybody thinks he's going to stop is just foolish.
What did you make of those scenes in the Oval Office, President Trump and President Zelensky?
I found it sort of beneath America, the way that took place. And the way we talk about now that, well, it's the Gulf of America. Maybe we're going to have to take back Panama. Maybe we need to acquire Greenland. Maybe Canada should be. What the hell's going on here? What president ever talks like that? That's not who we are. We're about freedom, democracy, opportunity, not about confiscation.
Former President Joe Biden interviewed by BBC Radio. He was speaking to mark the 80th anniversary of VE Day, the Allied victory in Europe at the end of World War II. President Donald Trump put out a proclamation declaring tomorrow Victory Day for World War II, writing, "Today our nation proudly commemorates the 80th anniversary of the Allied powers' triumph over National Socialism and Fascism and the end of World War II in Europe, one of the most epic victories for forces of freedom in the history of the world." That was part of the proclamation. President Trump spoke about it today in the White House Oval Office.
Well, thank you very much. Before we begin, I'm pleased to announce that I've just signed a proclamation officially designating tomorrow, May 8th, as a Victory Day for World War II, commemorating the 80th anniversary of America's victory in the Second World War. All over the globe, our World War II allies are celebrating this week, but the United States has never joined in with the proper celebration of our own, and the victory was mostly accomplished because of us. Whether you like it or not, we came into that war and we won that war, and we had a lot of help from a lot of great people, a lot of great allies. But I think there would be nobody that would say that we were not the dominant force in that war, and we don't celebrate it. And I think that's a great disservice to the people that lost their lives and people that fought so hard in winning World War II, and also a separate Victory Day for World War I, and we're going to be doing that too.
President Donald Trump in the White House Oval Office. It was before the swearing in of Senator David Perdue, Republican of Georgia, to be U.S. Ambassador to China. Education Secretary Linda McMahon suggesting a new patriotic tradition for the 4th of July with inspiration from the Jewish holiday Passover. Secretary was interviewed at the Milken Institute Global Conference in California Tuesday night.
Civics has just been removed from so many schools' curriculums. And I was just, a little bit earlier today, I was over at Prager University, and they were talking about a program initiative that they were doing relative to July 4th, because they don't really have a mechanism today where my students are told about the history of their country at families. So they were producing films and other aspects of it. And I thought, wow, that is such a good idea. And they actually were equating it to Seder in the Jewish religion, of how Passover dinner, once a year, the families share the stories, of their heritage. But we don't do anything like that outside of Seder. And so to have a similar kind of a program, boy, that kind of brings it back to, let's start it at home, and then let's it spread to all of the different schools that we have.
Education Secretary Linda McMahon at the Milken Institute Global Conference in Beverly Hills, California, Tuesday night. This is Washington Today. Another minute from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's testimony today before House Appropriations Subcommittee. This one a little contentious. Congresswoman Joyce Batty, Democrat from Ohio, asked about the long-delayed implementation of the decision almost a decade ago to put the portrait of abolitionist Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill, replacing President Andrew Jackson. You will hear Congressman Brian Stile, Republican of Wisconsin, in the chairman's seat with the gavel.
In 2016, former Secretary Jack Lew announced that Harriet Tubman was to be the new face of the $20 bill. Can you tell me what's the current status of this project?
No, ma'am, I can't, but my staff will get back to you.
No, I want you to get back to me, because, see, there seems to be an issue when it comes to things that affect people of color or people who live in poverty, whether it is what you're doing with Social Security, what you are doing with restricting funds.
The gentlewoman's time is expired. The gentlewoman's time is expired.
To me?
The gentleman
Mr.
from
Chairman,
Texas.
I need him to answer if he will. I'm not a staff person. I'm not asking him to have his staff report to me. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm addressing it to you to ask him to respect me. Mr. Chairman, I'm talking to you. I need him to address if he will answer me. No, I'm not going to.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
I'm not going to stop until you direct him to answer to me as a member of Congress.
Congresswoman Joyce Batty at a House Appropriations Subcommittee hearing, and testifying Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent in the chair spot, Congressman Brian Stile. This exchange went on for about another minute more. You can find the full video of the entire hearing at cspan.org. The switch to the $20 bill for Harriet Tubman was originally to take place by 2020, and Senator Jeanne Shaheen, Democrat from New Hampshire, has now introduced a bill setting a new deadline, December 31st, 2030. Black smoke was seen coming out of the chimney on top of the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican today, indicating no new Catholic pope was elected after the first round of voting behind closed doors. Earlier, the public was able to view the 133 cardinal electors entering the chapel and then one by one taking the oath of secrecy before the doors were sealed and the conclave begun. 3 hours later, this was how it sounded as Eurovision reported it.
Well, smoke. Yes, we have smoke.
We do have smoke coming out of that chimney, but it's definitely black.
It's definitely black smoke. It's 21 hours. It's 9 o'clock in the evening here in Rome. And that is,
They took their time with it.
They took their time. They had a good think. They listened to a meditation by the papal preacher, which probably took time as well. Definitely black smoke there, I would say.
And I wonder what the reaction is to in the square below, to the crowds who are seeing that and knowing that there has been no decision, no successful outcome on this occasion.
Coverage of the conclave at the Vatican today from Eurovision. In Washington, D.C., former U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, who is Catholic, talked about who she would like to see as the next pope.
Who is the Nancy Pelosi favorite for the next pope?
I was at the Pope's funeral. I loved Pope Francis. I hope that we'll have someone in his... with his kindness and goodness for people. But I do believe, as I was raised, if any of you are Catholic, that the Spirit of the Holy Ghost will determine who these cardinals choose and that they will act upon the inspiration.
Who do you admire among the prominent cardinals you talked about?
Well, I admire the Archbishop of Washington, D.C., Cardinal McElroy. Do you know him? He's fantastic. He's from California.
I think he's a long shot.
Born in San Francisco.
I think he's a long shot.
I don't think he's even interested. But you asked me who I admired. Among those, it just depends. I mean, Pope Francis appointed, it was 133 who will vote. He appointed about, 106 of them. And so they may be of his, or they may reflect what he did globally. He appointed cardinals from all over. So there's a Filipino, an Asian Francis in the Philippines who's wonderful.
He seems promising, huh?
He seems promising. There's an Italian who's progressive. Not all the Italians are progressive, but he is, and so we'll just see.
Congresswoman Nancy Pelosi, Democrat from California, House Speaker Emerita, interviewed by Jonathan Martin, Politico Politics Bureau Chief and Senior Political Columnist today in Washington, D.C. Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York told the Catholic channel on Sirius XM on Tuesday that he thinks that the conclave will go 3 days. He said because there are so many good candidates for Pope, and also he said that's how many pairs of socks he has. Cardinals will be taking more votes Thursday to try to elect a new pope. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word and get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.